The wedding invitation arrived on the same morning. I found the old divorce papers in the back of my desk, and for one terrible moment, I thought fate had developed a cruel sense of humor. The envelope was cream-colored, the handwriting unmistakably hers, and inside was a photograph of my ex-wife, Claire Whitmore, standing beside the man she intended to marry. She looked peaceful in a way she had never looked during our final year together. Beneath the photograph, she had written a sentence that made my hands begin to shake. "Before I marry him, there is one day I need to spend with you." When I called her, expecting an explanation, her voice was soft but steady as she asked, "Do you want to relive our memories?" I should have said no. I should have protected the scars I had spent 3 years pretending were healed. Instead, I looked through the bright kitchen window at the clear spring morning and heard myself say yes. Before we continue, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, because sometimes the people who hurt us most are also the ones who teach us how deeply a heart can heal. Claire and I had once been the kind of couple strangers smiled at. We met at a used bookstore in Vermont when we both reached for the same battered copy of a travel memoir. She laughed first, I surrendered the book, and an hour later we were drinking coffee by the front window while sunlight warmed the wooden table between us. Claire was impulsive, bright, and fearless in ways I had never been. I was careful, practical, and always thinking 3 steps ahead. She taught me to take long drives without knowing the destination, to dance badly at outdoor festivals, and to believe that a quiet life could still contain adventure. I gave her steadiness when her dreams frightened her and patience when her confidence disappeared. For 9 years, we built a marriage from ordinary things: Sunday pancakes, handwritten grocery lists, arguments over paint colors, road trips through small towns, and promises whispered while daylight faded across our living room walls. But ordinary happiness can become invisible when people stop paying attention to it. By our 8th year, my architectural firm was struggling, my father's health was failing, and every conversation felt like one more demand I did not have the strength to meet. Claire wanted a child. I wanted to wait until life felt safe. She heard rejection where I meant fear, and I heard pressure where she meant longing. Neither of us knew how to translate our pain. Our marriage did not end because of betrayal, cruelty, or a single unforgettable mistake. It ended through 1,000 quiet absences. I stayed late at work even when there was nothing urgent to finish because the office felt easier than home. Claire stopped asking me to join her on walks because she already expected my refusal. When my father died on a bright October afternoon, I folded inward so completely that even Claire could not reach me. She tried to hold me, but I treated comfort like an accusation. Months later, she admitted she had begun imagining a future where she did not have to beg her husband to speak. I responded with wounded pride instead of honesty. The day she left, the sun was pouring through the hallway windows, illuminating the dust in the air as she carried one suitcase toward the door. She waited for me to ask her to stay. I stood frozen beside the staircase, convinced that if she loved me enough, she would stay without being asked. She stepped outside, and I let the door close. By the time I understood that silence could be a choice, and that choices had consequences, we were sitting across from each other in a lawyer's office signing away the life we had built. 3 years later, Claire was engaged to a pediatric physical therapist named Graham Mercer. I knew only what mutual friends had carefully allowed me to know. He was patient, kind, and emotionally present. In other words, he seemed to possess everything Claire had once begged me to become. I had not remarried. I had dated occasionally, but every relationship ended when the other person realized some part of me was still standing in that sunlit hallway, watching Claire leave. When she suggested that we relive our memories, I assumed she wanted closure before her wedding. I told myself I could give her that. We agreed to meet at 9 the following morning outside the bookstore where we had first met. When I arrived, Claire was already there in a pale blue coat, her hair shorter than I remembered and her expression caught somewhere between courage and regret. The morning was bright, the shop windows reflecting clouds drifting across the sky. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then she smiled, and the years between us seemed to collapse so suddenly that I had to look away. That we began with the bookstore. The same bell rang above the door, though the shelves had been rearranged and the coffee counter was gone. Claire found the travel memoir that had started everything, now displayed in a newer edition. She held it between us and reminded me that I had lied during our first conversation, claiming I had already read it because I wanted to impress her. I admitted that I had spent the following weekend reading the entire book in case she tested me. Her laughter filled the aisle, and the sound hurt more than I expected. It was not painful because it belonged to the past. It was painful because it still felt like home. We bought the book, walked to the park where we had eaten our first picnic, and shared pastries on a bench beneath budding maple trees. Everything happened under the clear light of day, leaving no shadows in which either of us could hide. Claire asked about my work, my mother, and the small house I had purchased outside town. I asked about Graham. She spoke warmly of him, yet every answer seemed carefully measured. When I finally asked why we were doing this, she stared at the pond and said she needed to remember who she had been before she became someone else's wife. Her answer disturbed me. Claire had always believed that love should expand a person, not erase them. I asked whether Graham was trying to change her. She immediately defended him, saying he was generous and good, but her hands tightened around the paper cup she held. Eventually, she admitted that Graham had planned their entire future with astonishing confidence. They would move to Connecticut after the wedding. She would leave the community arts program she had spent 4 years building. They would buy a larger house near his family, begin trying for children immediately, and settle into a life that looked secure from the outside. Claire wanted children, but she no longer knew whether she wanted that specific life. She felt ashamed of her doubt because Graham had done nothing wrong. He loved her openly, included her in every decision, and never shut her out. Yet the closer the wedding came, the more she felt as though she were agreeing to disappear into someone else's certainty. I listened with a painful awareness that her confusion was partly my legacy. I had once made her feel unwanted, and now she was afraid to question a man who made her feel chosen. That we drove next to the overlook where I had proposed. The narrow road wound through green hills beneath the late morning sun. Claire sat beside me with the window partly open, letting the breeze lift strands of her hair. Years earlier, I had hidden a ring inside a picnic basket and forgotten the blanket, forcing us to sit on the hood of my car while tourists wandered past. My proposal had been clumsy, sincere, and interrupted by a barking dog. Claire had said yes before I finished asking. When we reached the overlook, the valley below was washed in spring light. Families took photographs near the railing, and cyclists rested beside the road. Claire stood in the exact place where we had once promised forever. Then she reached into her bag and handed me a folded letter. It was dated the week before our divorce became final. She had written it but never sent it. In the letter, she confessed that she still loved me, that she would return if I asked, and that signing the papers felt like cutting off her own hand to escape a locked room. She had waited for one phone call. I had never made it my first reaction was anger, because anger arrived faster than grief. I demanded to know why she was showing me the letter days before marrying another man. Claire's eyes filled, but she did not retreat. She said she had carried the letter for 3 years because it represented the last unanswered question between us. She had spent months waiting for me to fight for our marriage, while I had spent those same months waiting for her to admit leaving had been a mistake. We had both chosen pride, then blamed the other for the silence. She was not asking me to stop the wedding, she insisted. She only wanted the truth. Had I wanted her back? The answer tore through every defense I had constructed. I told her that I had driven to her apartment twice after the divorce. Both times, I sat across the street in my car during the afternoon, watching people pass beneath her windows, but I could not force myself to walk to her door. I feared she would reject me, and I preferred an unfinished hope to a final answer. Claire covered her mouth as she cried. The tragedy of our marriage was suddenly clear. Love had survived, but courage had not. We continued because stopping would have left us suspended in pain. Our final destination was the small lakeside pavilion where we had held our wedding reception. It had been renovated, but the wooden beams and wide windows remained. Sunlight shimmered across the water, and workers nearby arranged chairs for an afternoon charity event. Claire and I sat on the steps with the old travel book between us. She admitted that she had chosen this day not only to remember our happiness but to test her heart. She needed to know whether seeing me would awaken a love she could not ignore. I asked whether it had. She looked directly at me, and her honesty was both merciful and devastating. She said some part of her would always love me. I had been her first great love, the witness to her younger dreams, and the person with whom she had imagined growing old. But love, she had learned, was not the same as readiness. The woman she was now could not return to the marriage we had lost, and she could not build a new one with me simply because the memories remained beautiful that I expected those words to break me. Instead, they brought a strange calm. For 3 years, I had treated our past like a trial awaiting a different verdict. I had imagined that regret itself proved we belonged together. But sitting beside Claire in the bright afternoon, I understood that regret only proved something mattered. It did not mean it could be restored. I told her I still loved her too, but I did not want to become another force pulling her toward a life she had not freely chosen. She should not marry Graham because he was safe, and she should not return to me because our memories were powerful. She needed to decide who she was when no man's expectations were guiding her. Claire began crying again, though this time her tears seemed lighter. She said that was the answer she had secretly hoped I would give, not because she wanted permission, but because she needed to know I had finally learned how to love without controlling the outcome. I apologized for every time I had made her loneliness feel unreasonable. She apologized for leaving before speaking the full truth of her despair. We forgave each other there, not dramatically, but completely. Claire did not marry Graham that weekend. She met him the following morning in a public garden and told him the truth before guests began traveling. He was wounded, embarrassed, and angry, but he deserved honesty more than a beautiful ceremony built on uncertainty. Claire did not run back to me. Instead, she kept her apartment, remained with the arts program, and began counseling to understand why she had confused being chosen with being secure. Graham eventually transferred to Connecticut alone. Months later, Claire told me they had exchanged letters and reached a place of mutual respect, though not reconciliation. I also began therapy, finally speaking about my father's death, my fear of failure, and the pride that had disguised itself as self-protection. I learned that silence was not strength, independence was not isolation, and vulnerability did not make a person weak. For the first time since the divorce, I stopped organizing my life around what I had lost. Nearly a year after the invitation arrived, Claire and I met again at the bookstore during a daytime author event. Neither of us had planned it. She looked healthy, rested, and more like herself than she had on the day of our memory journey. I was carrying the old travel memoir she had given back to me, its pages now marked with notes from both our lives. We spoke easily, without desperation or hidden tests. Claire told me she had been accepted into a fellowship that would help expand her arts program across rural schools. I told her I had reduced my hours at the firm and begun designing affordable community housing, work that felt meaningful rather than merely impressive. When the event ended, we walked outside into the golden late afternoon sunlight. At the corner where we would separate, Claire asked whether I ever wished we had tried again. I answered honestly. Sometimes I did. But I was grateful we had not mistaken longing for healing. She smiled and said our marriage had not been meaningless simply because it ended. It had taught us how love could fail when fear remained unspoken, and how forgiveness could succeed when pride finally stepped aside. We embraced, not as two people secretly promising another beginning, but as two people honoring the life they had once shared. Then Claire walked toward the community center, and I headed toward my car. Halfway across the street, I looked back. She looked back too. We raised our hands in farewell, and this time, neither of us waited for the other to return. The sunlight lay warm across the pavement, and I realized that closure was not forgetting someone. It was remembering them without abandoning yourself. Before this story ends, leave a meaningful comment about the memory you had to release in order to grow, or the person you chose to forgive even when the past could not be repaired. Your words may help someone in our community understand that forgiveness does not always lead people back to each other, sometimes it simply sets both hearts free. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Claire and I did not get our marriage back, but we recovered something just as important, the ability to remember our love without being imprisoned by its ending. Some memories are not doors we are meant to reopen. They are windows through which we finally see how far we have come.